The Kansas City Chiefs are once again Super Bowl champions, defeating the Philadelphia Eagles. Was this one of the greatest high-scoring Super Bowls of all time, or was this just a lack of defense in Super Bowl 57, Matt? Takeaways and reaction from the Super Bowl coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for our listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/locked on. So I teased it in the open, Matt. 38-35 Kansas City Chiefs. There's a lot of takeaways from this game, but the big question I have for you, Matt, was this like a really great Super Bowl with all these, with high scoring? 38-35, you would think, oh, what a game this would have been. Or was this just offensive firepower versus defensive ineptitude that made for a boring game because there was no stops? And in the second half, the Kansas City Chiefs went right down the field and scored every single time.
It's a great question because I think these are two exceptional offenses, two exceptional quarterbacks. Just so I don't forget, I thought Jalen Hurts was miraculous in this game and answered a lot of questions if they still were hanging out there.
It turns out making him play quarterback wasn't the best strategy after all.
Absolutely. And I do adhere to the notion that more and more when great talented offenses with great talented offensive coaches go deeper into games, that defenses cease to exist. I mean, that theory took a small step back in 2022 for me, but I thought this was more assurance that once I figure out all your checks and all your blitz packages, that I'm going to tear you up in the fourth quarter if I'm a great offense. So I think that has something to do with it. So I'm going to say, yes, this was a great Super Bowl, but unfortunately, I'm going to bring up two things that aren't fun to talk about first, before all the fun things to talk about. Is as fans, that penalty took the air out of a little bit of a balloon in terms of, is this thing going to go down to the wires? Hurts going to get the ball back? It became a foregone conclusion that the last 2 minutes or so of the game was going to be kneel, field goal, and that's rough,
And a very weird Hail Mary attempt. He only threw the ball at 30 yards, right?
Yeah.
Somebody else to come back, and maybe they had a play where he was going to pitch it or something. Where he threw the ball was like, because it looked like he was going to chuck it 70 yards. And it was like, what is that throw? What is happening right now? I don't know if it slipped out of his hand or if
it looked like it slipped out of his hand, but I hadn't thought of that angle. Maybe they were only trying to go 30 yards and then have a guy come behind it and do the pitch stuff, or I don't know. Maybe they had a unique way of looking at that, but my son and I are watching like, what was that?
That was a weird.
You can throw the ball further than that.
It was just another sad trumpet end to the weird end of the game after the Bradbury penalty. And I don't know how much you would want to put on James Bradbury, because it was actually better for him. It would have been better for the Eagles for him just to allow a touchdown than
looking
to
back
have
at it,
pass interference. It's like the worst thing that could happen. And you're not really thinking about that really at the time. And we saw Jerick McKinnon, kind of slide at the 1 yard line. By the way, his toe went over the line when he did that.
Did it really? I didn't know.
But the ball didn't, so I guess it wouldn't have mattered. And you give yourself up, so it's at the beginning of giving yourself up. So I don't think that even matters. But it did feel, everybody that wasn't a Chiefs fan probably felt a little bit robbed at the end of the game with how it ended, because you didn't get to see that drive, the attempt of a drive from Jalen Hurts and the Eagles.
So what was your take on the penalty? Mine was, if it's week 6 and that's in the second quarter, no one thinks twice about it. It is a penalty. I respect Bradbury for coming out after saying, yeah, I held him. I mean, that's a man's move there.
He wasn't adamant on the field, which is one of the big things. I thought he would have been freaking out. And so I think he knew he was trying to get away with something, probably hoping it wouldn't be called in that point of the game. And he admitted after the game it was a penalty. And so it was a penalty and you threw the flag. So I can't really fault anybody for it. And I know I've seen it on the other side where it's like, these guys are holding them at the end of a game you got to call it like it's football still. So there is,
Yeah.
I see both sides of it. And if you see a penalty, you got to call it. So I don't have a huge problem with it. It was just unfortunate the way it ended that way. But it also felt like, and I'll go to Mike Sando. I saw this morning Mike Sando's response to it. Yeah, okay, it was a penalty and it was a correct call, but it's like getting a speeding ticket going 65 into 60. And I thought that was pretty great by Sando.
That's a good move. Yeah, exactly. I think that's well said. Again, if it was not in that instance, or even if it was earlier in this game in the first half, no one blinks twice about it. But they weren't calling it close in this game, holding, grabbing, coverage stuff, which is usually the case in Super Bowls. I mean, I'm sure people remember the Legion of Boom teams would just mug guys in the Super Bowl because they don't want to flood them with flags. I mean, the Patriots did that as well. I'll be honest.
You should have seen my mentions as soon as that happened. It was like, where were the calls on Crabtree against the Seahawks? They're getting held in the Baltimore Ravens. That used to be the thing. They were like, make it as obvious as you have to. It doesn't matter. Hold this player. Do not allow them to catch the football. That's how egregious it got. And I don't like that either. So, but it did feel like a letdown that this was called. But in the end, I don't really have a huge problem with the call.
In the world of ref gaffes in the history of the league, it's way, way, way down the list for me. Like you said, it probably is like going 65 into 60. I personally would not have thrown the flag because of the situation, and you hadn't thrown them yet. I think there has to be a little bit of a human element to the reffing of it, and just say, I haven't called that to this point. I recognize that's a penalty. I'm going to keep the flag in my pocket for now.
And I think part of it is where the ref is standing and throwing that flag. It might have looked more egregious. And when you looked at it live, you didn't see it. And then when you see the replay from a certain angle, you still don't see it. And I think that helped cause the outrage quickly on that because of when it happened. And because it didn't even look like that much of a penalty until you saw the angle. And then when you see the angle of him holding the jersey, if that's the first angle everyone saw on this broadcast where millions of people are watching the game, then I think people would say, oh, yeah, he held him. And I think people would have less of a problem with it. But they already just got the outrage going before they even saw what the actual penalty was and where he was tugging on his jersey.
Sure. And there's a lot of emotions at play and all that as well.
Yes.
I know this segment we're about to wrap up, but I want to bring up the other negative just to get it out, which I also think contributes to your original question. I was offended with the condition of the field. I mean, you're in Arizona. I mean, this is coming. I understand that you have to paint the field differently and those areas might be a little different, but how can the field conditions not be A+? I mean, I'm not even saying A-. Like, it needs to be the nicest field on the planet. You have the money, you have the resources. I can't pretend to know the first thing about maintaining a football field, but the fact that it influenced the game as much as it did time and time again, and guys are changing cleats, I think is a big issue. And I haven't heard anyone take this angle, but to your original question, and I'm going to give the Chiefs pass protection all the credit in the world, and their O-line played phenomenal. But there was only 2 sacks in this game. I think it really hurt the pass rush, the get off. I mean, sure, it hurt some guys changing directions. Nobody thinks about the trenches, but I'm sure Chris Jones would have been more of a factor. That Eagles D-line have been more of that factor. But you're exploding on,
Yeah, someone like Hassan Reddick, who's built on speed in the corner. There was a pass rush rep I saw where he almost flew out of the screen because he slipped so hard, trying to with the outside edge rush and trying to get around the corner, and his feet just went in that direction and his head went in that direction. It was like, you don't see guys fall like that, like it's like they were on ice skates on an NFL field. And what's crazy is this was the plan for the best possible field that the NFL put into play. They put $1 million into this field. They grew it especially for the Super Bowl. The field is removable, so they moved it out to get sunlight every day. And it was like they went through this entire process to have the best Super Bowl field possible, and it turned out to be the worst field possible. So who do you fire for that? Because this was the plan that was carried out to the league specifications to have the best field, and it turned out to be an awful field.
Yeah, I mean, did they hire someone's brother-in-law to do it because he's your buddy? I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know about field conditions, but I liked your point there about Reddick, because I was thinking more of the pass rushers get off, but certainly changing directions. If I'm going to go to a rip move, but I'm going to switch over to a swim halfway through with my counter move, or to your point, which was a really good one, was bending the edge is really, really hard for those speed guys. And and let alone the skill guys with the ball in their hands. I mean, to me, that those two things were just needed to be addressed and put a damper on the Super Bowl to me.
Now that I think about it, the most affected players by a bad field might be corners and DBs trying to cover and
Pass rush,
defensive linemen flying off the edge at full speed.
And I bet that's why the score was so high.
The score bears that out.
Yep. Well said. I agree.
Okay, next. We'll talk a little bit more about why there were so many points in this game. Some of the big takeaways from Super Bowl 57 coming up. But first, today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. When you're at your best, you can do great things. Sometimes life kind of gets you a little bogged down and you may feel a little overwhelmed or like you're not showing up in the way that you want to. And working with a therapist can help you get closer to the best version of you, because when you feel empowered, you're more prepared to take on everything life throws at you. And when you learn better coping skills and you can start solving your own problems, become that problem solver, it is so important and so impactful on your life. And sometimes you just need that check-in with the therapist to make sure you're hitting all the points you want to in your life to get where you are going. So if you're thinking of giving a therapist a try and giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, flexible, affordable, and entirely online. You're not waiting in traffic trying to rush around after work, your lunch hour, whenever it is, to try to get to your therapist. And it's as simple as it could be for you to log in face-to-face if you want, video conference with your therapist. There's other ways if you don't want it to be a face-to-face situation. All you do is you fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and there's questions to lead you in the perfect direction to get the right therapist for you. And if it ends up not feeling right, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So if you want to live a more empowered life, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thanks once again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure that you check out all of the podcasts that are available, because your team is covered every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Not just NFL teams either. We're talking NBA, Major League Baseball is about to get going as well. Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft. It is officially draft season for all 32 teams now in the NFL as well. So it's looking like Shane Steichen's going to end up with the Indianapolis Colts as their next head coach. And we'll have more on that later in the week when that becomes official. And I don't know if there's a better resume than this football game for him as a coach. And we saw Andy Reid and the Chiefs offense, and we saw the Eagles offense. And I think you can look at the defense and say, man, both defenses played terrible. But I do think it was more of the offenses were just dialed in and playing extremely well. And it wasn't because the defenses weren't bad, because it's not like they were just gashing them on the ground or anything. They had to go to the air. They had to go get points. Obviously, the way Jalen Hurts plays and some of his big rushing scores, but he set a lot of those scores up with his arm as well. So just a really great job by the offenses, more so than bad defensive play, in my opinion. And I got to call out both offensive play callers as, guys who would get a game ball from me in this one.
Yeah, and let's start with the Eagles and Hurts to me, because with all respect to Mahomes, who's an all-time great and is the best player on the planet, I thought Hurts was the most impressive player in this game. And if you look at their rushing totals, Hurts had 70 of their 115 yards. I mean, their running game, their traditional run game, did very, very little. And I give the Chiefs credit for that too. The Chiefs tackled quite well. I thought if this game got out of hand, it would be because the Eagles were just gashing them in the run game and pushing the guys back, and that was not the case. So give Kansas City's run defense a lot of credit. But Hurts as a runner was tremendous, but that's a side note to me. I mean, as you said before, him from the pocket and the deep throws and the plays A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and to a lesser extent Goddard had were really, really impressive. I mean, he was unbelievably accurate to all levels. I thought Hurts proved to me even further, he's a big-time guy,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And to the point where you're like, you maybe dial back the running game, because he took some shots and, he missed some games this year with the shoulder injury. You don't want to see Hurts go down the career path of getting banged up, and have sort of a shortened career like someone like Cam Newton did, because he's developing so well as a passer. He doesn't have to lean on that as much. And it's a nice weapon to have, but you don't want your quarterback carrying the ball 15 times a game in the long term. You know, you don't. And he's proven that he doesn't have to be a guy that has to win just that way. But how undefeated and how like, is there a better weapon right now in the NFL than his quarterback sneak, which is not a 4th and 1 play anymore? It's like a 4th and 3 play now. It's like it's almost like it's almost 3 yards guaranteed and maybe more depending on what downs you wanted to run a QB sneak. Like you could make it the focal point of your offense and have a pretty good offense just on QB sneaks because of how good they are at it and how good Jalen Hurts is at it. And you think he's got a guy on him and he just keeps pushing forward.
Yeah, it's a tremendous point because it's such a weapon. If I can guarantee 1 to 3 yards anytime I need it, and I'm telling the whole world how I'm going to do it, and you still can't stop it, is a great weapon. Side note, we could talk about this in the offseason, but I hope they change the rules that you can't push a ball carrier. You know, I just don't love the nature.
Enforce the rules because it's illegal, right? They just I'm pretty sure that's not allowed. And
I thought it was not allowed before, and then they took it out of the rule book. I don't know because everyone does it now. I mean, they don't even hide it. I hope that goes away, but he doesn't need it. I mean, that's for sure.
I feel like that's a good way to get people hurt too. When you've got guys pushing from behind, and so if you're looking for safety, especially for your quarterbacks on those sneak plays, that is something that's probably. And look, you need to skew some things to the defense,
right?
And so I think that's part of the push too. It's like defense have to have an opportunity to stop offenses at some point in the NFL, and when you see a Super Bowl like that, it's like, wow, okay. And look, but neither team. They both had some some ability to run the ball. Mostly it was Hurts and the quarterback running the ball. And the biggest run on the other side was a banged up Patrick Mahomes scampering 26 yards. It was like, what is he doing? Get down. What's going on? Don't get hurt. But it was pretty amazing to see him run. And like Patrick Mahomes moves different than most people anyway.
Very much so.
You could tell the way he was favoring it. It looked like he was running in ski boots or something. It was, I don't know, for some reason that play just really cracked me up. And I was glad he didn't get hurt again because that was a huge worry for me. It was like, please do not end the Super Bowl this way where Patrick Mahomes gets hurt in the first half and just can't play, and we don't get to see a competitive second half like we saw in the NFC Championship game. And so I'm glad whatever he got shot up with, and I'm sure there was a lot of medical expertise involved with that, getting him back on the field in the second half. Gutsy performance for Patrick Mahomes, and that's why he's your MVP.
Yeah, and that was a huge concern for me. I mentioned two of the negatives, the penalty and the field conditions, but I think we're very fortunate as fans that when he was tackled around that ankle and he was screaming, he was hurting bad. And I'm thinking, oh man, this is like the Niners game. Like if we don't have a quarterback to watch, I mean, as fans, we're going to get robbed of a second half that could be historic. And good for him. He came back and played unbelievably well in the second half, of course. Started carving those guys up. I saw Pro Football Focus, they do their adjusted completion percentage. His adjusted completion percentage in the second half was 100%. You know what I mean? No turnover worthy plays.
Yeah.
Really had a feel for their defense. I mean, that was historic there.
And going back to the play calling really quick, how good were those two? I believe it's called arrow return arrow, something like that. Basically, where they give you the jet sweep look, but then they stop the player in motion, stops, comes back, and it worked to perfection twice. Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore touchdowns. Yeah. The Sky Moore touchdown was amazing to see the DB that's responsible for him making a beeline across the field, and he didn't even realize he had stopped yet. And he's on the other side of the formation by the time he's catching the touchdown pass.
Yeah, really well done. I mean, I give Reed credit for going, not only calling it once, but he's like, that worked so well. Let's try it again to the other side. I mean, like that
chase my guy across the field. We've got a counter for that.
Yeah, and another Andy Reid note here is, they were losing pretty good at one point in this game. They were down 10, and the only team in history that went into a halftime deficit of 10 or more points to come back to win was the Patriots over the Falcons. Yet still, they threw 27 passes and ran the ball 26 times. I didn't think that would be Reid's, MO at all, especially in the second half when Mahomes was heating up. And I knew they threw the ball more in the second half, but they stuck with the run and they did it quite well. And I've been a little hesitant to give Pacheco credit. And I don't know if he's long for this world with the way he runs, but they got a dude in him, and the offensive line deserves a lot of credit, and Eagles D deserves a little bit of blame as well.
Yeah, just fine at running back. And I think that's one of the lessons here is like, be just fine at running back, but it's a quarterback-driven league. You got to put up points to win a Super Bowl. And our guy Marcus Mosher, who you work with on the
Locked on Dynasty with us, yeah.
but also co-host of Locked On Cowboys as well, and does a lot of work in a lot of different places. And every season he updates his list of the leading rusher in the Super Bowl for the winning team, how much they get paid. And again, it's a guy who makes less than $1 million.
Wow.
You know where dollars go. It's the passing game. It's quarterback. It's receivers. It's guys who get after the quarterback. It's guys who cover receivers. And again, we see it again. The most expensive leading rusher in a Super Bowl in the last 14 Super Bowls was Percy Harvin, who wasn't even a running back.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, it adds up. I mean, and I'm sure there's a lot of pricey quarterbacks.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
no doubt about
it. And it's all about the quarterback in the NFL, as we saw with the 38-35 final. All right, let's wrap up our thoughts from Super Bowl 57 as we spiral into the 2023 offseason, starting on tomorrow's podcast. By the way, it's going to be Matt Williamson's first mock draft of the
how about that
tomorrow as well. More to come here, Peacock and Williamson. But I got to let you guys know about FanDuel because you know what? The NFL season's over, but you can still find a number of ways to get your sports betting fix. And it starts with the NBA. We're in the midway point now, post-trade deadline in the NBA season. So now the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. I love how easy the website is to utilize, whether it's on the app or at FanDuel.com. And you could be like one of the FanDuel users for the Super Bowl that put up $4,000, won $82,000 on a same game parlay that they built when it was anytime touchdown for Travis Kelce, anytime touchdown for Jalen Hurts. Those two are a little easier, but then the third on his parlay was an anytime touchdown for Kadarius Toney. And when that hit, he won $84,000 on his bet, on his parlay. So have so much fun with those parlays. And don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, Matt, here we go. We talked a lot about the offensive side of the ball. We talked a lot about the field conditions here. I do want to focus a little bit on the defensive side of the ball and especially special teams, which I think was a clear victory for the team that won this football game in the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it Friday.
What's the missed field goal? Sorry to interrupt. They had a missed field goal. I think they still clearly won that game. And man, I wonder how nervous Butker was to line up the game winner after missing a field goal earlier in the game.
Yeah, I thought about that too. Like, this isn't a sure bet. He has not had a good year. I mean, with that much pressure on you and that many eyes on you, and he hit the upright. I mean, if it's 2 feet to the right, it's in. If it's but several people, and thanks for this, on Twitter called me out and said, "Hey, Williamson, thanks for telling us that these two teams are like the bottom of the league in special teams. I didn't realize that. You'd think everything's great with all these teams because they're so good everywhere else." And it was a big deal. And it leads me to another conversation. Like, yes, the Chiefs got hurt by a missed field goal. And I think you could even question Andy Reid, too, of should I went for it there? Because the Eagles coaching staff's going for it time and time again. KC played it a little close to the vest and not a gimme chip shot field goal either. In a game, you knew there was going to be a lot of points. But Toney might be the most dangerous player in the league with the ball in his hands, in space. I mean, he is a rare type of ball carrier weapon. He's frustrating as could be. But that being said, at his best is wow. And the punt coverage was really bad. I mean, the side of the field, when he changed direction, there wasn't an eagle to be had. I mean, all their lane discipline had totally caved in the opposite direction. And we could definitely talk special teams, but it leads me to another conversation too and this is kind of how you opened the show. Was this a great Super Bowl, or was it bad defense? Often in evenly matched games, big games, it's the team that hurts themselves the most that lose. There's a lot of old-time coaches that'll tell you more games are lost than won. And the Eagles should kick themselves a little bit for a handful of plays. I mean, some pre-snap penalties. You can't have that. That huge return was probably the biggest play in the game. I know everyone wants to call Bradbury's penalty the biggest play in the game. I think the punt return was the biggest play in the game.
I would say those are 2 and 3, and the biggest play in the game.
I'm missing the easy one. Hurts.
The fumble, the fumble return for a touchdown. Which, if any one of those, especially the return or maybe not the return, because who knows if the way
Mahomes
the
had time,
Chiefs were going, they were just rolling down the field every time anyway. But and to be honest, I might even given them more time to get back and get the ball at a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
But the fumble return for a touchdown was the biggest play in the game. And you're right, when teams are firing like that on the offensive side of the ball on both sides, it's the team that shoots themselves in the foot, which was clearly the Eagles.
I mean, it's a small thing, but you remember, the Eagles had Sirianni's losing his mind because they didn't get a play in. So they take they delay a game, just a couple procedural things that hurts you. It's such a fine line in games like this that the Eagles didn't play badly. They don't have anything to be ashamed of. And talked about Hurts. I thought he was the best player in the field, but he had the worst play of the game too. I mean, that was on him. But you have almost 36 minutes of time of possession, but you had double the penalties. You had the only turnover. The other team scores on defense / special teams, almost scores there. They hurt themselves as much as the Chiefs took it. And Mahomes and Reed are going to take any error you make and stab you in the heart with it.
Even with Mahomes and Reed, and how tired that Kansas City defense had to have been with the skewed time of possession. It's just so rare when you're over 2-1 time of possession against the other team. The first half was 22 minutes to 8. I mean, that's unheard of. I mean, that is pure domination of of owning the football. And I don't know how there was enough gas for that defense of the Kansas City Chiefs at the end of the game. And really, there wasn't a lot of gas for either one of these defenses most of the game. But it's really rare to see a team lose when they're owning the football, possessing the football that much.
Absolutely. I mean, should they have? I think there's some blame to be given to the Eagles for the self-inflicted wounds. And hey, you had them against the ropes and you couldn't knock them out. Again, this is a true heavyweight fight. These are the two of the best boxers in the world. This is, and another kind of nugget from the box score that I found interesting was obviously the Eagles ran more plays than the Chiefs. I mean, there was 72-53, but they had 20 snaps on third or fourth down. That's not a winning formula. I mean, they weren't consistently moving the ball on early downs, where the Chiefs only had 8 snaps on third or fourth down. They were ahead of the chains, getting first downs on first and second downs, and they've been the best in the league at that from the beginning of the season. 20 snaps on third and fourth down is a tough way to live.
And it was amazing how good they were on third and fourth.
And they were good, yeah.
Right, and absurdly good in these playoffs with those fourth down plays. It never came back to bite them, really, which is kind of living on the edge a little bit, because I get being aggressive and that's okay, but if you need to be that aggressive and go for that many fourth downs, it's usually not a great sign.
Absolutely true. I just wrote an article concerning the Steelers, because the Steelers were actually great on third downs this year. Nobody would think that, but it's an unsustainable way to live. I mean, you lead the league if you're 50% on third downs. So if you're snapping the ball 20 times on third and fourth downs, you're probably not going to be successful the percentage you need to sustain it. They were in this game, but it was a little bit of a flaw was their early down work by the Eagles, which if they were a little better there, maybe Kansas City isn't able to come back in the second half.
I have one more note here, and I want to talk about Travis Kelce and where he's at historically in the playoffs, because we know how far ahead Jerry Rice is in a lot of statistical categories that he'll probably never get caught as a pure wide receiver. And his similarly in playoff statistics, Jerry Rice is way ahead.
Crazy, yeah.
Receiving yards, receptions, touchdowns. But Travis Kelce's going to run him down. And look, at this day and age, there's more playoff games, so that helps someone like Travis Kelce. But Jerry Rice, all-time leader in postseason touchdowns with 22. He's played 29 games in the postseason. Jerry Rice did in his career. 22 touchdowns, 2,245 yards, and 151 receptions. That's number one all-time in all three of those categories. Travis Kelce, though, is number 2 in all three of those categories in only 18 games played in the postseason. And he's got 133 receptions. Jerry Rice has 151. Travis Kelce might pass him in receptions next offseason. With the way the Kansas City Chiefs are going to the AFC Championship game every year, that's 2 or 3 more games.
Yeah, I mean, they basically play 2 or 3 games in the postseason, even after getting a bye every year, which is remarkable. And it's funny you went down that road, because before the game, I tweeted this out. You know, he's played 13 playoff games with Mahomes. I mean, he had a couple before that with Alex Smith. But in those 13 games, he had 104 catches, 1,173 yards, and 14 touchdowns. So yesterday was basically that same pace. So in playoff games with Mahomes, Kelsey averages just under 100 yards a game, has more touchdowns than games played. I mean, like, that's unbelievable.
It's crazy. Yeah, he's got 16 touchdowns in 18 games. So he could pass Jerry Rice next year in probably not touchdowns. He's still 6 behind in touchdowns, but not unheard of. But he'll probably pass him up in receptions if they go to the playoffs again next season. And he's got, another 700 yards to go in receiving yards as well. But nobody should be shocked if Travis Kelce's the all-time postseason leader in receptions for sure, and potentially even touchdowns and receiving yards by the end of his career. Some stats that nobody ever thought Jerry Rice could be caught in. The regular season stats probably too far out there, but some of the postseason stats, Jerry might get run down.
Yeah, and he just passed Gronk. My son asked me, he's like, does Kelsey have a better career than Gronk? And I said, no, but one more year like this, maybe. I think it's really close. And maybe we'll talk about it later in the week. But, I mean, the legacy of Kelsey, Reed, Mahomes, really solidified itself with this one.
Absolutely. And of course, as we do when teams are eliminated, and even the Kansas City Chiefs, who were never eliminated, we'll talk about what these teams have to do to get back here and win a Lombardi after the 2023 season as well. That's coming up later.
They're really different spots.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah.
And mailbag episode on Wednesday. So get your questions in for our Wednesday mailbag episode this week. It's off-season time in full, whether it's Super Bowl questions, these two teams, Chiefs and Eagles, or whatever team in the NFL. Hit us at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter, and Matt Williamson's Mock Draft 1.0 coming up tomorrow on Tuesday's episode. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen. Back tomorrow, Peacock and Williamson.